Have you ever imagined how much knowledge can vanish in a single day? They say ink is the blood of scholars, but what if that ink truly mixed with blood until it turned the greatest river in the world black? Welcome back to HistoraBlend. Tonight, we are not ordering coffee. We are ordering a glass of black ink. So, steady your heart, because what we are about to witness is how the most perfect city on earth was wiped from the map of history. Close your eyes for a moment and let your imagination travel backward, far into the past. The year is 1258. The world at that time was dark and unforgiving. In Europe, people still believed that bathing could bring illness. Illiterate kings waged wars over muddy strips of land, and nightfall meant absolute darkness and fear. But if you keep traveling east, across the Mediterranean, along the calm waters of the Tigris River, you would find something almost impossible. A jewel shining in the middle of the desert. Baghdad. They called it Medinat al-Salam, the city of peace. Look at its shape. A perfect circle. Not a square, not chaotic, but a vast, deliberate circle designed by mathematicians, not merely stonemasons. At its center rose the golden dome of the Caliph's palace, towering 40 meters high, reflecting the desert sun like a beacon for all human civilization. It was said that even the fastest rider needed half a day just to circle its outer walls. Now, let us descend into its streets, breathe the air, not the stench of waste like in London or Paris. Here the air was fragrant, the scent of roses from hanging gardens, blending with freshly brewed coffee and the unmistakable aroma of aged paper. Yes, paper. While much of the world still wrote on expensive animal skins, Baghdad was producing paper as fine as silk. Knowledge was no longer a luxury. It was daily nourishment. And here lies its heart. Bayt al-Hikmah, the House of Wisdom, the greatest library ever built by human hands. Inside these halls, silence. Only the soft scratch of quills upon parchment and the quiet whispers of translators. Imagine it. Books from Greece, Persia, India, China, all gathered here. Plato, Aristotle, Galen, all reborn in Arabic. In one corner, perhaps, you might see Al-Khwarizmi discovering algebra and refining the concept of zero, ideas that would reshape the world forever.
In another, physicians dissecting the human eye, centuries before Europe learned how to treat a toothache. Baghdad was not merely a city. Baghdad was the mind of the world. It felt eternal, as though its thick walls would protect knowledge forever.
But history has a cruel sense of humor. For while scholars counted the stars in the sky, they failed to notice the dust rising on the eastern horizon. Dust kicked up by horses, belonging to men who cared nothing for poetry, nothing for mathematics, and only for one thing: total conquest. There is an old saying, empires do not fall because of enemies outside, they fall because they rot from within. While scholars guarded the light inside the libraries, inside the palace, that light was slowly dimming, replaced by the glitter of deceptive gold. Let us meet the guardian of this city, Caliph al-Mustasim Billah,
He was not an evil man. He was simply too comfortable. He inherited a throne from a dynasty that had ruled for 5 centuries, 500 years. To al-Mustasim, the Abbasid Caliphate felt eternal, like the rising sun.
He believed Baghdad was too sacred to be touched, that the Islamic world would rise on its own, that God would handle the rest. The belief was beautiful, but it was intoxicating, and beside him stood a man who kept pouring that poison, the Grand Vizier, his trusted advisor, Ibn al-Alqami. History records that it was al-Alqami who convinced the Caliph to make the most fatal military budget cut in history. He whispered sweet reassurances that paying soldiers was wasteful, that the Mongols were merely wandering barbarians who would never dare approach the holy city, that peace could be bought with gold, not secured with steel. And so the tragedy began. As the greatest storm in centuries approached the gates, Baghdad did the unthinkable. It disarmed itself. Thousands of wall guards were dismissed. Defense budgets were slashed to fund palace luxuries. The Caliph slept peacefully on cushions of down, while the swords meant to protect him were being melted into ornaments. He forgot one thing. A hungry lion does not care how expensive its prey's jewelry is. Meanwhile, beyond the horizon, Hulagu Khan did not sleep. The grandson of Genghis Khan cared nothing for 500 years of legacy. He cared nothing for which god protected the city. He sent a letter, not a negotiation, a death sentence. Short, direct, terrifying. Tear down your walls, fill in your moats. Surrender. The past is finished. The future belongs to us. If you refuse, do not blame fate. Blame yourself. And how did the Caliph respond? Not with preparations for war, not with evacuation plans, but with pure arrogance. He replied with mockery, without the slightest trace of fear. He told the conqueror of worlds to return to the grasslands and stop dreaming of conquering God's city. He believed bluster alone could chase away a storm. It was the last letter he would ever write, because after that, diplomacy ended, and the harvest of lives was about to begin. January 29th, 1258. The nightmare finally knocked on the door. If the Caliph believed the Mongols were merely a band of reckless horsemen, he was gravely mistaken. What the people of Baghdad saw that morning was not just an army. It was a perfectly engineered machine of death. Hulagu Khan did not rush the attack. Instead, he ordered his forces to dig trenches and erect wooden barricades encircling the entire city of Baghdad. Do you hear that? They sealed the city, like rats in a trap. No one could enter, no one could leave. Supplies were cut off. Hope was cut off. Inside the palace, the sound of celebration had died. Caliph al-Mustasim looked out from his window, and for the first time he felt the cold weight of reality. Before him stood rows upon rows of trebuchets. Massive stones, carved from distant mountains, now soared through the sky, crashing into the proud walls of his city. Towers collapsed. Dust swallowed the skyline. Panic. Arrogance vanished within seconds, replaced by humiliating despair. The Caliph tried to negotiate. He sent envoys. He offered gold. He offered tribute. He begged for mercy. But remember Hulagu's words. The past is finished. Hulagu rejected everything. To him, that gold already belonged to him. Why accept a gift he could soon seize by force? He gave only one command to his generals. Destroy their towers. Leave no place to hide. February 10th. The walls that had stood for 5 centuries finally broke. Not because the stones were weak, but because the people within had already lost before the swords were drawn. Mongol forces flooded the streets like a black tide, and when their banners rose above the highest towers, every soul in Baghdad understood this was no longer about defending a city. This was the end of their world. Sunday, February 13, 1258. The sun rose over Baghdad, but its light was swallowed by pillars of black smoke rising into the sky. The gates stood wide open, not because the city welcomed them, but because there was no one left to close them. Hulagu's forces entered. Calm, order, cold. They did not charge like madmen. They moved like machines designed to harvest lives. One house after another, one door after another. Women, children, the elderly. There was no difference in the eyes of Mongol steel. They did not distinguish between poet and soldier. To them, the people of this city were merely grass to be cut. But the greatest tragedy of that day was not the death of its people. It was the death of its soul. The soldiers arrived at the House of Wisdom. They saw millions of pages. To us, they were centuries of medicine, astronomy, philosophy, mathematics. To them, they were trash, wrapping paper, fuel for a fire. They began to clear the shelves. Aristotle's works, painstakingly translated, were thrown into the mud. Star charts drawn by hand over decades were torn apart beneath horses' hooves. And then, they did something the world would never forget. There were too many books to burn, so they threw them into the Tigris River. Legend says that so many volumes were cast into the water that Mongol soldiers could cross the river on a bridge of books without wetting their horses' feet. And the river, once clear, changed its color. Black from the scholar's ink, red from the martyr's blood. That day, the Tigris did not carry water, it carried grief. History would later whisper that the world moved backward by centuries in a single afternoon. And in the midst of this chaos, where was the Caliph? Did he fight to the last breath? No. He surrendered, hoping for mercy. Hulagu invited him to dine inside his tent, but the plate before the Caliph was empty. Hulagu gestured toward the towering piles of gold within the tent. "You have so much gold, Caliph. Why did you not give it to your soldiers so they would die protecting you? Why did you hoard it?" The Caliph trembled, silent. Hulagu smiled faintly. "Since you love your gold so much, eat." Of course, Hulagu did not truly force him to eat it. The Mongols had a rule. Royal blood must not be spilled upon the earth. So they granted him a final honor. The Caliph was wrapped in the finest silk carpet he owned, like a cocoon of luxury. Then the horses were ordered forward, again and again, until the movement inside the carpet stopped forever. Thus ended the Abbasid Caliphate, not with a noble blade raised high, but crushed within its own silk on the soil it once believed eternal. and above Baghdad, the sky wept ash. After February 13, Baghdad fell silent. So silent that the wind moving through the ruins sounded like distant screams. History records a horrifying fact. Hulagu Khan and his army were forced to move their camp outside the city. Why? Not because of ghosts, but because the stench of hundreds of thousands of decomposing bodies became so overwhelming that even the battle-hardened Mongols could not endure the air. In the corners of the shattered city, they left behind their signature monuments, pyramids of skulls, not one, many. Historians debate the numbers. Some say 200,000. Others claim 800,000 lives were lost. To us, they are statistics. To humanity, they were worlds extinguished.
But the destruction of Baghdad was not measured only in bodies. When the black smoke finally cleared, the city was left with two great wounds. The first wound was carved into the land itself. The Mongols destroyed the ancient irrigation systems of Mesopotamia, vast canals that had existed since Babylonian times, systems that had sustained fertile soil for thousands of years. They were leveled. And the consequence? Green fields turned to barren desert. Baghdad, once called the Garden of Eden, slowly became a plain of dust. Ecologically, it never fully recovered, not even to this day. But dry land, perhaps, can one day be watered again. The second wound, however, was deeper. It lay within the soul of a civilization. Before that day, the Islamic world had been a place that asked, how does the universe work? It was a civilization alive with inquiry, confident, certain that reason and revelation could walk side by side. But after the Mongols burned the libraries, after thousands of scholars were executed by the river, something changed forever. The optimism dimmed. In its place grew a collective trauma. Some survivors began to whisper, perhaps this is divine punishment. Perhaps we strayed too far into philosophy, too far into worldly knowledge. Gradually, intellectual openness narrowed. The spirit of bold exploration gave way to preservation. From discovery to defense, from innovation to caution. The invasion did not merely destroy books, it fractured the backbone of what historians call the Islamic Golden Age. Yes, centers of power would later rise in Cairo, in Istanbul, but the pure intellectual heartbeat of Baghdad, it never truly returned. The river of ink had washed away more than paper. It washed away the confidence of a civilization that once dared to ask the biggest questions. And the echo of that silence can still be felt today. And now, here we stand in the present. We can only imagine what might have been if the books of the Tigris had survived. Perhaps humanity would have reached the moon 2 centuries earlier. Perhaps cures for diseases would have been discovered in the Middle Ages. Who knows? But history does not recognize the word if. It only remembers what happened. A caliph who slept too comfortably was awakened by a nightmare too late. And we, living in the future, are left to gather fragments of wisdom from their ruins. So what remains, besides dust and horror? The fall of Baghdad teaches a costly lesson. No civilization is invincible. Skyscrapers, the internet, artificial intelligence, all of it.
can collapse in a moment if the foundation beneath it rots. It takes centuries to build a civilization. It takes only a week of arrogance to burn it down. Knowledge without the strength to protect it is fragile. Baghdad had thousands of poets, but not enough swords. They believed culture alone would command respect. They forgot that to a wolf, even the wisest lamb is still meat.
The illusion of safety is often the beginning of destruction. History is a long river. Sometimes its waters are clear, sometimes they run black. Our task is not to judge the dead, but to ensure that the ink of our own age writes something worthy of survival, not another chapter of ruin. Tonight's story has reached its final page. Let us close this book, stained by ink and tears from the banks of the Tigris. Thank you for sitting with us, for listening to echoes of collapse in the quiet chamber of HistoraBlend. Keep the ink alive until we meet again on the next journey through time. Good night.